Hello everyone and welcome to the KMC Controls webinar on the KMD Translator. We're really happy to have you all with us today. I'm very excited to get down to all this great content. I have the Building Geniuses with us today. We have Eric Kruder, Kevin Mooney, and Tom Joslin that are going to be leading us through the discussion and presentation. And just as always, remember, feel free to enter your questions into the little questions box there. We'll try to attend to as many of them as we can during the webinar. And then we also use these to kind of guide our future webinars and topics moving forward. So without further ado, we're going to move into the live presentation here. I'm going to hand it over to, I believe, Tom.
How's that look?
Looking beautiful.
All right. All right, let's get going. Is my tie on straight? Okay, good. We're going to talk a little bit today about the translator. So we've got this product called the KMD-5551E Translator. We're going to do a little overview on it, see how it works with our KMD controllers. Talk a little bit about what pre-work you should probably do before you do one of these jobs. Talk a little bit about installation setup, the licensing, some recommended Niagara settings that we have, and then lastly, you'll discover your backnet controllers and points. So what does this thing actually do? So the KMD-5551E Translator, this thing looks really familiar. If you've ever used our 5051E router, this guy looks exactly like it, except for on the front, it says KM Digital Translator, but has the same footprint, has the same ports as the router, and has some of the same functions of it a little bit, but what it does inside is completely different. So don't get confused if you see one of these. You make sure that it says the KM Digital Translator when you take it out to the job and not the 5051E router. So let's talk a little bit about how this guy works. So basically, the translator is going to take your existing KMD controllers and their respective points and makes them backnet devices and backnet points. This is a real fancy little description of how this actually works on your tier 1 and tier 2 controllers. So a tier 1 would be, you know, a LAN controller, and a tier 2 would be any of your 7000s, 5000s, and those kind of things. So it takes both of those and then turns them into backnet routing. So what it does is it goes out and finds all your controllers and finds all the points that's inside those controllers, and then makes a virtual controller inside, and that virtual controller is backnet. So it makes those controllers look backnet and makes the points look like they're backnet. So your inputs, outputs, variables created in KMD are now backnet points, and they have the same type of rules that backnet is applied to. So you can override them. They have priority. They have all the same different functions that you would use when you're working with backnet points. You guys want to add anything?
You got the thumbs up.
I got the thumbs up. Okay. So pre-work. Here's some things you should probably think about when you're getting ready to use the translator. Do you have more than one LAN controller? How many sub-LANs do you have? And the reason this is important is that it's going to depend on how many routers or translators you're going to need. So, go ahead.
How would I make the decision on how many LAN or how many translators I need in my network? If I have a LAN controller and many LAN controllers out there, have 2 sub-LANs,
right.
Each will say with 60 controllers.
Yep.
How would I think through the number of translators I would need for a system like that?
So if you've got 2 subnets or 2 sublans, you're going to need a translator for each one of those. So if you've got an A and a B, the A one can handle the LAN controller and the subnet. The other translator will handle the other subnet. So if you've got, then you would have 60 on one, 60 on the other, as a for instance. So that's how that would work. So you would need 2 in that instance.
So a translator is good for one mainnet panel and then one MSTP trunk. Is there a recommended number of devices per subLAN that we could that we recommend, or are there trade-offs? You know, bigger network, less points; smaller network, more points. How do we think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Kevin, you got a 2 cents on that?
Well, more than likely, you're going to be bringing these points into Niagara. And we all know that Niagara is data hungry. So once you bring them into Niagara, then Niagara is just going to keep polling them. So there is this limitation to the amount of data we can get through a KMD network and translate it to BACnet. Off the cuff, normal Niagara graphics, I would say it's probably in the 32 range of controllers. Now, maybe you could go 64, like if you had a LAN light, depending on how much data you really wanted to bring in. It's not really a hard and fast rule here, just kind of like some guidelines.
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking at.
I would agree with you there. I think it's really going to depend on the quality of your network too.
So network quality. The other thing that I think about when I think about KMD and the translator is, you know, KMD, you know, point passes, you know, almost automatically. There's a lot of buffer that KMD has built in to make the point passing easier.
Yeah.
You know, here with the translator, whenever it gets a BACnet request, it's going to push out a KMD request, and we have to wait on that token to go around that network before Niagara gets an answer back.
Right.
You know, if I have a larger network and that token's going slower, you know, that's going to make Niagara not get a response in the time that it sees. So while the translation may be working and the data might be coming through, you know, Niagara might be expecting it faster than the translator could actually give it.
Right.
So there again, smaller networks are preferred versus, you know, many of those old KMD networks, especially, you know, something that's MSTP only, could be 128 nodes sitting there. You know, we want to break that into, you know, as many pieces as we can get it to get that token going around faster.
Right. So what's the solution there if you start feeling like your network's not? Do you put a repeater in, or do you just break it and put another translator in?
You want to break it and put another translator in.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on to the next couple of points.
Yeah, so in Niagara, you have to use a Jace or a Niagara supervisor to license the translator. We'll get a little bit more into the licensing a little bit. KMC Commander also works with the translator. If anybody out there has used the KMC Commander, it works really well. So Win Control will no longer be the user interface. So the customer is going to lose that Win Control user interface. That's the whole idea of this, is that they're going to be using Niagara as their interface from now on. Now, if you still need to go out and work on something on a controller, you can absolutely do that. You know, plug your hockey puck in and work on the controller and update it to if it needs to be changed in some way. And then on the device itself, on the translator, there's a way to just refresh that, so it'll go out and pull those points back in again.
So I guess the theory here is if I'm making changes that would change what the point definitions are,
Yeah.
You know, if I'm changing from, you know, one data type to another, that's when I want to go refresh my translator.
Right.
Because in BACnet we have a concept of analog and binary, whereas in KMD it's just a variable.
Right.
So if we're making small programming changes, you wouldn't necessarily have to do anything with the translator, but it's just something to be cognizant of as you're working through and making changes.
Right.
You know, what you do has an impact upstream.
Correct.
So what you're saying here is wind control really becomes a tech tool,
Right.
a technician's tool, not a user interface for the end user.
That's right. Right.
Okay.
So all of the things that you're using with wind control, like your alarming, trends, schedules, all that, that's all going to be done in Niagara now. So that all goes away in wind control. And that's not something that you can import. So Translator imports controls and imports the controllers and imports the points, but it's not going to import your trends, schedules, alarms. All that's going to have to be recreated in your Niagara front end.
So alarming currently in KMD is done in Control Basic. So those alarms go out on the network, and if there's nobody to receive them,
Yep.
then they get clogged up on the network.
Right. You should take those out.
So you're going to have to go in and edit all the code on all the alarms.
You should, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
No.
That's a little pre-work tip for you.
But the payoff there would be faster
Yeah.
token times and better resulting bandwidth to get data into Niagara.
Yes, correct.
Okay, cool.
So install. Let's look a little bit about, this is kind of what a network might look like. And this is with the two translators like we were just talking about. So the translator is a BACnet device. It's going to need an IP address, device instance, network numbers. So if you've done a router, you know that the configuration page looks very similar to the translator's configuration page. It can be a BBMD if you need to be. One of the really slick things that I think about the translator is it goes out and automatically finds all your KMD devices on the network. Now, this can take a couple minutes if it's a fairly large network. So hit the button and, well, actually you don't have to hit the button, it just does it. It's kind of really neat how that works. But you see on the diagram there, you've got a tier 1 and tier 2 controller. You've got a translator A, translator B, all that's going into a switch and ultimately being pulled into a Jace or supervisor.
Or it could be commander.
Or commander, yep.
But the network layout would be the same.
Network layout would be the same, correct. Yep. So you would need 2 translators in this instance. So how would you do the licensing on something like this? Is that you require 2 licenses?
I think so. The license services from the MAC address, I believe, of the translator, no?
Actually, the licenses go through the Niagara station. So it pings the translator every 30 minutes, I think. So as long as it sees it on the network and can ping it every 30 minutes and says, yep, it's licensed. So that's what you need to have to make that work. So you would need a license for each one of the translators.
So the if I have multiple instances of Niagara and multiple Jaces, say,
yep,
only one of those would need to be licensed to keep the translator alive.
Yep.
Although they both could access the information via BACnet from either translator.
Yep.
So yep. One Niagara license to many translators.
Yes. That's a common question we get. So talking about the licensing, so you install the KMC Translator service on your Tritium station, Jacer Supervisor, or Commander. Discover your KMD and add it as a BACnet controller. The Jace or the supervisor has always got to be in communication with those translators. Only one station needs to operate the translator service. So as long as it can see it, your translator service should be good.
Are there any other points in the translator that Niagara or Commander would be interested in, or we're just adding it as a device to keep the license alive?
Just adding it as a device. There's nothing inside that you can pull out of the translator.
Okay.
So in that regards, yeah.
So all of the virtual devices that it's
Yep.
hosting are discovered separately as generic BACnet devices in
Yep.
Niagara.
Yeah, when you go out and discover, go out and hit the BACnet Discover button, it's going to discover the translator and all of the controllers right off the bat. So at that point, you're just like working with Niagara normally. You pull in all the controllers and then go into the points folder and then pull in all the points for each individual. So there's a couple settings that we like for you to change in Niagara. Because Niagara is kind of a hog when it comes to wanting information, we set that pull frequency to slow. Now, I think by default, the pull frequency for slow is 30 seconds. You can increase that to 45 seconds if you feel like your network's not quite getting around quickly as you'd like. So yeah, I would say 30 to 45 seconds is usually pretty decent. And then right to start, right on up, and right on enabled, change all those to false because you're not going to need those.
So explain to me slow.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's how often it goes and asks for information, how often it's pulling.
And you can change the time on that.
You can change the time on that.
So if your points are going stale, then it's probably an indication that you need to add more time to the token cycle.
If you've got some points going stale or possibly going orange, that means Niagara didn't hear back from them quick enough. So you might change that speed.
Okay.
Slow it down a little bit more. We're trying to merge 20-year-old technology and technology from today, so it's a little slow.
I guess, are there any other strategies that we could talk about? If I do have a point going stale or in the fault, what are my other options to try to get that information to respond quicker to Niagara?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you could add an IP controller and then pull those points into an IP controller and write some code and then just pull information out of that, because then your traffic is on the IP side.
So you're saying in that instance, we're going Niagara to the BACnet IP controller that is going to respond very quickly.
Yep.
And then this control basic code there would read and write from the translator at a frequency that the KMD network can absorb.
Yes.
So gives us a little extra buffer and lets us control that request messaging a little bit better than just having Niagara do it on its own.
It's going to be a lot harder to bombard that network at that speed, passing points back and forth.
Great.
So after you got all the points and settings complete, you can discover the virtual BACnet controller and its point in Niagara.
Does it come through as a generic BACnet or is it a KMC BACnet?
Generic BACnet.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you've done most of our Conquest controllers and you bring those in as a KMC BACnet point, you don't need to do that with these. They're just going to be a generic.
So if I added the KMC BACnet node, it wouldn't do anything?
I don't think so. Yeah. Each virtual controller's got a MAC address device instance, just like you would have with the normal BACnet rules. These can be set in the translator's web page. So if you've got a certain number of or way that you like to have your device instance look and MAC addresses look, you can make that how you'd like. The points show up as BACnet points, priority arrays, override capability. Like I said before, trends and alarms will be done in Niagara. So create your schedules, link those to your occupancy points. Then you're going to have to recreate all your graphics as well. You can't import the graphics from Wind Control or reuse those graphics.
So all the front end features, whether it's graphics or alarming trending, really needs to be in whatever head end is there.
Yep.
So
Yep.
either Niagara or Commander.
Yep, you're kind of starting over with your front end.
Okay.
We got some questions?
We do have a few questions. I think we've covered most of them. We had questions about licensing. We had a question about what does it mean to refresh the translator? We talked a little bit about if I'm making changes in the KMD network and I'm changing a point type, I want to go into that translator web page and hit refresh, so that way my data types match what's actually in my controllers.
There's a refresh button in there on when you're looking at all of the controllers, the virtual controllers. On the top right hand corner, it says refresh the controllers. It's pretty straightforward. So that doesn't mean unplug it, plug it back in.
Right. Okay. And then the last question we had is what we just touched on as we bring devices into Niagara. Are they generic BACnet or are they KMC BACnet? And the answer there was they're generic BACnet controllers.
Definitely, yeah.
So, we'll give it a couple more minutes. If you guys have any questions or a topic or a what if, certainly type that in the window and we'll cover it here as we wrap things up.
I have a question.
Okay.
Oh, Kevin's got a question. Uh-oh.
I have a network. I have a job I want to do. How do I go about getting one of these things?
So the best thing for actually using a translator on a job is talk to your salesperson. You'll be assigned a sales engineer to review your job. We want to make sure that it's a good fit. We want to make sure we've thought through splitting up our networks and point passing and what all these steps that we've talked about today that are going to go into making a successful translator job. So we want to review those with you before we just approve an order and ship one.
Right. Some of that pre-work that we talked about, we want to make sure that's been thought through.
Good.
This is a good question. Just came through. Can we talk a little bit about what the priority array in BACnet in the translator and how that would affect a KMD point when it gets written? So let's say we have a schedule right. We want to push a schedule from Niagara to a occupancy point in KMD. How does that happen?
How does that work?
Yep.
So if it's just a writable point, it's just going to write to it straight through. There's no priority array in KMD. So KMD doesn't know what a priority array is. So when you're pushing a point from BACnet into KMD, it's just going to turn that off and on.
All right. So when Niagara writes the point, I should see a priority array in the virtual object of the translator have something in that priority array.
Yes.
What happens to the value on the KMD controller?
Yeah. If it's an override, it's going to be the manual flag. It's going to be checked, and then it's going to be the translator is going to remember what that was before. So when you put it back to auto, it's going to remember what you had it as, and then it's going to uncheck it and then put it back the way it was when you before you overrode the point.
So from a KMD perspective, really anything in that priority array is a manual override, and it's going to check the manual flag in the KMD device.
Right. Right.
Awesome. The next question we have is, does the translator jar file need to be added to the JACE so it will work to the translator?
Yes.
Yes. Again, one of the stations on the system would need to host that jar and ping those translators. All right, next question. We're getting some good questions come through, so lots to talk about here. When you discover the translator in Niagara, will it show the individual controllers, or is it the translator a big bucket of points that you have to sort out?
No, it actually separates them very nicely, and actually will have the name of the controller. You know, so if it was AHU1, it will come in as the controller name is AHU1, and then you discover that controller, and then you would go into the points folder and import your points just like you would in Niagara.
All right, next question. If you install multiple translators on a 485 network, would you disconnect the 485 and break it down to separate, or do you just put more translator on open MAC addresses and assign certain controllers to certain translators?
I think you'd be better off breaking up your network. That way, the whole point is to get the token around faster.
Right.
So if you're just adding translators, you're just adding more token users. So you want to break up your network and get that token passing, get your throughput of data back to the Niagara faster.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then the last question that came in, this is kind of a what if question for a job site. It says we have multiple sites across a couple different states. Do I set one translator per site, and then would those be BBMD'd all together, or how does it look if I have multi-site?
Yeah, you could definitely do the BBMD as long as they're on different subnets, and then you know, they would all communicate over their, you know, put the table in there for your BBMD to access all the sites. It kind of works like the router in that perspective.
Yeah. The other option I would say, and again, this is where it's really helpful to review these installation with a sales engineer. If this question came into me, I would ask, do I have Niagara at each one of these sites? Right. You know, it would be easy if I already have Niagara at each site. I want to get, you know, the translator locally, and then I only have backnet between the translator and Niagara locally, and Niagara would then be communicating across sites, across those states to the different jobs. I think especially with the translator going into KMD, you know, again, think about bandwidth. So I want to try to get those tokens going around fast. I want to minimize any latency, pushing all that traffic out over, you know, across multiple states or big networks may not quite fit the best if I'm trying to push a lot of information.
So what you're saying is use the Niagara as your BBMD across the network instead of the translator.
Right. But again,
good clarification.
Bigger discussion with a sales engineer as you guys are interested in using the translator, either again with Niagara or with Commander. You know, kind of thinking through that example with Commander, you know, we would have one commander per site probably, and then it would all be tied together in the cloud. Right. So very similar to what we do in Niagara.
Yeah, you would just access one place in the cloud, and that would go to all the sites.
Right. We just got a question. I think this is a good one. So I have a job that has a LAN controller and a subnet, but I'm really only using the LAN controller to connect the subLAN to wind control. What happens to the LAN controller here? Can I remove it, or do I need to keep it for any reason?
No, you could remove it. You wouldn't need it. That's all it's being used for. Yeah, no reason to have it.
The only value is once you remove the LAN, the value the LAN controller is providing is your ability to use wind control from a remote station and get to your subnet. If you remove the LAN controller, you will have to carry your PC to a controller to do service work on it. You no longer will be able to get through the LAN controller to the subnet.
Yeah. So in that instance, I don't know, maybe just leave it there at the job, just unplug it.
As long as you were not doing a lot of point passing out of the LAN controller or doing alarming and things like that, you're not using it for that, then I think it's okay to sit there.
But it doesn't require,
it's not required.
You don't have to have it.
So it might be a choice of, you know, how we're servicing that job. If it's a site where we're making programming changes regularly, then it might be worth to have remote access to it. If it's something stable and I can remove it, you know,
Right.
that would certainly be preferred, but not required.
Right.
Cool. Okay, that was good. If there's any other questions, we'll give it a minute here, and then we'll turn it back to Andrew.
Yeah, no, thanks guys. That was awesome. I'm going to take back over here. If there are any last minute questions, go ahead and make sure to get those in here before the end of the webinar. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to make note, since we're talking about the translator, our new website and our navigation on our website. So if you were to go to the product page for the translator itself, I just wanted to point out that if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll have a section where you have the specifications, the documentation, and the new button for accessories, and that populates everything that you might need related to that product. And this works for all of our product pages. It's a really neat feature, and it can save you a lot of time on the website. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. We also wanted to shout out our new video, 7 ways to secure your building automation system, brand new video that just hit on YouTube. Really useful tool for everyone to really check out, whether you're an end user or not. It just has some great advice in networking in general. I also wanted to let everyone know that we've updated our 101 series with a new PID loops video and a new open protocols video. So if you haven't seen those, definitely check those out. And we are celebrating our 50th year. We had a great celebration last Friday, and we wanted to thank those partners who sent us different gifts and different things like that. But we wanted to show you a little bit about what we were up to, and we had a great time. We had a lot of cornhole. We had a big lunch. It was fantastic. Again, all of our webinars are on YouTube, and you can check them out there. So this will be on YouTube later today, and you'll get an email follow-up. And you can check us out on social media at any time. We are on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. So definitely we want to have conversations with you, and we'd love to have them there. And we just want to thank everyone again for attending. It doesn't look like we got any more questions, so we really appreciate you guys coming. And we love conducting these webinars, and we hope they're bringing you great value. So have a wonderful Friday and enjoy the rest of the month.